Township School District for another session of Critical Conversations. This one is called This Is Us, but it's the Burlington edition, continuing the critical conversations about diversity in our community. My name is Liz Scott. I am the district's Director of Human Resources and Community Relations. I'm also a proud resident of Burlington Township. I'm also the coordinator and very proud member of our district's equity team. Our goal is to bring about awareness, to educate, and to provide a forum for productive conversations and interactive experiences. I want everybody to remember, and this is especially for our panelists, that this is not a race. It's a marathon, it's a journey. And you should expect and accept non-closure. This is an ongoing lifetime process that really doesn't have a finish line. In our society today, as human beings, we feel we have to have closure regardless of the issue, and we feel that the conversations might be meaningless if there is no closure. And it's actually the opposite when you're talking about the topics that we're going to be discussing tonight. This is ongoing work, and it doesn't necessarily leave everyone walking away feeling like they got everything that they wanted out of the conversation, but it's a growth process. And that's the important thing to keep in mind, that you need a growth mindset. You have to be willing to take risks, just like our panelists are doing here this evening, and accept that much of this is about changing ourselves, not necessarily changing others. We'll be dealing with a topic that can't be fixed in one setting because it's ever evolving. And remember that each and every one of us is at a different stage in this growth process. We have to be prepared to give and get grace, and we should give our neighbors room to make errors because every day one of us may need that grace given to us. So it's important to understand that issues of race, diversity, equity, and inclusion, it does impact our entire community. And that's why this critical conversation is so important. We have an amazing group of individuals who have made the decision to come and sit at our virtual roundtable to talk about the skin they live in and their experiences. And we also have an awesome keynote speaker whom I will introduce after we introduce our panelists. So we're going to jump right in. And it's important that we each share our own stories in our own voices. So instead of me introducing our panel, I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves and to share briefly why they decided to do this. So I'm going to start with Carla.
Good evening, everyone. I'm so grateful to be here. As she said, I'm Carla, Carla Bennett Morrison. Bennett is my maiden name. I've been in Burlington Township since birth, and that is really the reason I'm here. When I was asked to do this, it was not even a second thought, and I'm here because I will do anything within my capacity for my community. I love it. I was born here, and I will die here.
All right. Ruben.
My name is Ruben Ramos. I am really just glad to be a part of this conversation as well. I think it's really vital that we are listening ears to one another, hearing other people's experiences, and validating those experiences. So I'm excited to be a part of this, both to learn and be able to partake more than anything else. I'm here to receive more than I am to give. So sorry for everybody else.
Awesome. Jennifer.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Jennifer Benog, and I have been a resident of Township since 2003. I have 3 sons that have gone through the school system here, and most of my time and my husband's time here has been spent kind of focusing on the 3 of them and sports and activities through school. And I really kind of just felt like this was a little bit of me time and time for me to share my experiences, our family's experiences here in the township. So I'm happy to be here, and I want to thank Liz for inviting me to join everybody.
Thank you. Prabdeep?
Yes, hi, my name is Prabdeep Pandher. My family and I moved here to Burlington Township in 2004, and I did most of my education here from third grade on, and I'm a member of the class of 2013. Besides that, I am now a council member, and this was, when Liz reached out, this was really, I just really wanted to be a part of it. And I remember last year when she hosted the Know Your Rights, that was an eye opener, and I was glad that she was taking the initiative. So this is definitely a great opportunity, and looking to learn and also share some of my experiences.
Thank you. Bobby Joe?
Hi, I'm Bobby Joe Miller. Thank you for inviting me again, Liz. I appreciate it. Sorry. I don't have too many experiences. I haven't ran in, I'm lucky. I consider myself lucky and blessed that I have not ran into really anything. So I have a big mouth and I use it, and some people like it and some people don't. And that's why I'm here. And I feel I can teach people and also receive at the same time.
Awesome. Thank you, Bobby Joe. Jim?
My name is Jim Ford, also lifetime, born and raised here in Burlington Township, moved here in about 1973. I was born in 1972, but member of class of 1990, and have lived here my whole life other than going to college and a couple of years where, some transition years after that. But current resident, I work for a local law enforcement department and represent the New Jersey State Fraternal Order of Police. I'm happy to be part of the conversation. When I was invited through a fellow employee that works for Liz, I didn't hesitate in accepting the invitation. So I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, Jim. Alicia?
Good evening, everyone. Liz, thank you as always for inviting me to these events. I know I've attended a few in the past, so this is the first time I'm on a panel. So I feel honored that you thought this was a space that I could share my experience in. I am a Burlington Township resident. I'm a transplant from New York. I've lived in Burlington Township since 2006. I said earlier 7, but it's 2006. And quite honestly, it took some getting used to coming from a very city type of environment to this is really the suburbs mindset. So I've grown to love Burlington Township. I've had my children come through the school. I have 3 left in the school, 2 graduated. And at one point, as I shared with the panel, for 2 years, I had a child in every school in the district. So Burlington's my home, and I'm proud to be here in this conversation.
Well, I want to thank all of you, and for our attendees, just take a look at this panel. This is Burlington Township. We are so unique in the diversity that is us. We are so unique in the sense of community that we have. And the fact that we can get so many people together that look different to share their stories is just amazing. And I truly want to thank each and every one of you for saying yes. So we're going to step away from the table for a minute. And we're going to hear from our keynote speaker. And I want to thank the panel for laying the foundation for our conversation this evening. So our keynote speaker is Dr. Tonya Breland. She was once a resident of Burlington Township. She once worked for Burlington Township, was an administrator also for a small period of time, but she specializes in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Tonya has a passion and a commitment to increasing access and opportunities for those who have been historically marginalized, particularly Black and Brown students, and has dedicated her life's work to ensuring equity in education in other sectors. Through her research, she birthed a framework for sustainable equity planning in which she helps districts identify areas where they are equitable and have inadequate capacity or are vulnerable to inequities. Her work is also transferable to organizations looking to address matters of diversity, equity, inclusion, which some people term DEI. In Burlington Township, we call it EDIT, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, and we add the T for team because it takes a team for us to do what we do. And I want to thank Tonya for working with us and helping us in our efforts as a district. Tonya, while she was working here, was awarded the National Milk and Educator Award. She's a recipient of the highest honor. And I was so pleased to be able to be a witness to that when it happened. And she's an educational leader who has a lifelong mission of making a difference in the lives of others. In her career, Tonya served as she's been an elementary teacher, a principal, a curriculum supervisor at the middle and elementary level. She previously served as the co-chair of the State Professional Learning Committee with the New Jersey Department of Education. And she is a sought-after trainer, coach, consultant, and speaker to school districts from all over the place. She also taught the NJXL program where she is preparing professionals to be school district administrators. She also served as the director of the Office of Professional Learning at the New Jersey Department of Education, and most recently as the Deputy Assistant Commissioner in the Division of Academic and Performance before leaving to relaunch her educational consulting firm, TESO Consulting Group, TESO. And again, that group specializes in DEI or EDIT. Tonya is the author of 2 books, Fight to Make It Happen, 6 Power Principles in Fulfilling Your Purpose and Living Your Dreams. And she also has a children's chapter book called Michaela Mitchell Moves Away. Tonya is a graduate of Howard University, where she received her Bachelor of Science. She also graduated from Nova Southeastern University, where she received her Master of Science, and New York University, where she received her Doctor of Education in Leadership and Innovation. So we have a powerhouse person here with us this evening. Tonya, I'm going to kick it to you.
Thank you so much, Liz. I did not expect you to read all of that. That was too much. But I am very happy to be here this evening and to share with all of you. I have to commend and thank Liz for the invitation and also for your leadership and the leadership of Burlington Township, who have made a commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion as a team, so that all students can and individuals within the community have a sense of belonging. I also want to commend all of the audience members for being here and being a part of this conversation. We hope that this evening there's something that we can shed a little light on for you, perhaps maybe change some paradigms, help you to get to know people on a level that you may not have previous to tonight. And then we hope that you are a part of the change that the district is looking to make. I also want to acknowledge all of the panelists. It's a pleasure meeting most of you, and looking forward to engaging in dialogue with you as we go through the evening. So I like to often start off by sharing my own personal story. I was 7 years old when I first was exposed to what I believe to be racism. Although I did not have the words to describe it, I didn't exactly know what it was. I just knew that I was being treated differently. But before I talk about that, I have to share why that year stood out to me, second grade. Because previous to that year, and I didn't grow up in New Jersey, I grew up in the Midwest. And at this point, we were living in Illinois, in a small town. And I was really fortunate to have a kindergarten and a first grade teacher who looked like me. Now, it wasn't an urban district. It wasn't a district that had a whole bunch of teachers of color, but it was also during a time, now this I did research on, I didn't know this as a kid. It was during a time that that particular town was really trying to diversify the teaching workforce, kind of like what we're doing here in New Jersey. And I was blessed to have a kindergarten teacher and a first grade teacher. It was that first grade teacher, Mrs. Betty Clark, that really made an impact on me. At the time I was in first grade, my parents had recently divorced, and my life was very different. And I don't know if she knew that story about what was going on in my life. All I know is that she took me under her wing and she made me feel like I was the only child in her classroom. She made me feel very special. She made me feel valued. She made me feel seen. And I knew that I was intelligent because of just the feedback that I received from her. And I thrived. I loved school. She even took me home one day. That's during the time, this was the 70s. So you could do stuff like that in the 70s. You dare not do that now. But, and I had dinner with her family, and she had a daughter and a niece who were around my age, and we played and had a great time. And, you know, I've since been able to like find her and thank her for just making a difference in my life. But she was the reason why I was inspired to be a teacher, because she made a difference for me. And I felt like I wanted to do the same for students like she had done for me at a very vulnerable time in my life, where my social emotional being was probably kind of shattered. But I didn't have the language to express that. But she took me under her wing and really took care of me. And so I love school. I absolutely love school. And I played school at home as a little girl. I was always the teacher, my poor siblings, and I would boss them around and, you know, do what I saw teachers as doing at the time. But when I went to second grade, something drastically changed. I had a second grade teacher who did not see me and didn't treat me the same way. And at first I didn't think much of it. But when I started noticing a pattern of her ignoring me when I would raise my hand to participate, being mean to me, just treating me differently than the other children. And when I first started second grade, there was another boy who was Black like me. And he moved away at some point in the school year. And I was the only Black child in the classroom. The only thing that I could think that was different, that made me feel different, was that she treated me differently than she treated the other kids. And I said, it must be because I'm Black, because that was the only thing that was different about me. I had a love for learning, a love for school. There was no reason why she should have treated me the way that she did, but she did. And the only thing I could think of as a little girl was, it must be because I'm different. I knew I was different from the rest of the kids in my classroom. Children know very early when they're different from the others, whether it's because of their race or their religion or their socioeconomic class. It doesn't matter. Kids know that something is different. And while I love school, you know, she created an environment where I didn't belong. But I was resilient, thank God, because if I had not had a community that affirmed me around me, I would not have had a stronger sense of self. So although she was treating me the way that she was treating me as a second grade child, for whatever reason, I didn't think it was of any fault of my own. I was like, there's something wrong with this lady. And I remember growing up just thinking, you know, all this time went by and I'm like, you know, that teacher never liked me, but I couldn't substantiate that until decades later. I went home to visit and my parents handed me this box of all my childhood mementos, and in there is a report card from my second grade teacher. And would you believe that she had nothing positive to say about me? And I was like, wow, that memory stuck with me. I knew that there was a problem with this lady, but I had no idea, you know, to the extent that she put things in writing that I would never have done as a teacher, because she didn't like me. But I grew up in an affirming community, and I had a sense of who I was. I heard statements as a little girl, Black is beautiful. I had baby dolls that looked like me. And then I had those teachers that just poured love into me right from the very start of school. And so while second grade could have changed my perspective about school, it didn't. It really didn't. I continued to love school all the way through high school. But I was in environments that really were affirming communities where I felt like I belonged. And my family created a sense of love that made me feel like I was valued, I was smart, I was beautiful. And that was really important as a Black child growing up. They gave me a positive self-concept because of that. But we have children in our schools who don't feel like I felt, who don't have the community surrounding them, or even teachers who make them feel like they belong and make them feel like they are a part of a community of learners. And that's how we know that this conversation like we're having tonight is so important. It's so critical because children know whether or not you like them. They know whether or not you are for them. They know whether or not you value them, whether or not you think that they're special. They just happen to know. And kids also know whether or not you're biased. They may not have the language. They know if you have assumptions and you've made associations and you have certain prejudices against them. Although they may not have the language to tell you so, they know, and they know as early as 3 years old. And I know this because studies have been conducted over the years. One of the earliest studies that many of you may have become familiar with is the doll test from the 1940s. And the doll test was a test where two psychologists, Kenneth and Mamie Clark, were actually conducting a study where they were trying to see how students' self-esteem was affected by racism and prejudice. And this was actually this study was actually very paramount in the Brown v. Board of Education Supreme Court case that most of you are familiar with. And what this study found was that children between the ages of 3 and 7 made associations with dolls, white dolls and Black dolls they were presented with. And they were asked to characterize the dolls based on, to identify the dolls based on various characterizations. So those characterizations might have been, who's the good doll? Who's the pretty doll? Who's the bad doll? Who's the nice doll? Who's the friendly doll? Who's the mean doll? And they asked those types of questions of those students. And those students, sadly, Black and white, as young as 3 years old. So think about you if you've had children and you currently have preschoolers in your home. Those preschoolers made the kind of associations that overwhelmingly they chose the white dolls as aligned to the positive character traits. They saw the white dolls as good. They saw the white dolls as nice and smart and friendly, and the Black dolls as mean and ugly and bad. And what that showed the psychologists that were conducting these studies was that these children felt inferior to other children around them, even so much so that some of the children identified themselves as the N-word. So the biases that these children had picked up on in their surroundings, these early messages that they received, were impacting these children's self-esteem. And this was used in the Supreme Court case. And so I share this story and I share this study because it's been duplicated multiple times over the years, decades later, in different ways. And the findings have been quite similar. And what that tells us is that there are messages that children are receiving very early in life that create bias in them, whether they are children of color or children who are white. They are at very young ages developing biases simply because what they hear, what they see, what they don't hear, what they don't see is creating a narrative in their minds that they begin to make associations about people's characterizations based upon their skin color, based upon their religion, based upon their sexual identity, based upon their socioeconomic, based upon their ability. All of that has created images and associations and biases that students have that are both explicit and implicit, some that they don't even know. Oftentimes we'll conduct trainings, my company, and we will have educators or the individuals in the audience to really examine their early messages about groups of people who don't look like them or who aren't like them. And when they begin to do that examination and they look at what were some of the first messages that they received about people who weren't like them, they began to make associations and start to understand where some of their own biases started. So we often say, well, it's the media images. Media is a part of that, but it's also a part of who were your parents around? Who did they spend time with? Who didn't they spend time with? Who did they talk about at the dinner table? Who didn't they talk about? How did they interact with different groups of people? How did they not interact with different groups of people? All of this combines to create these early messages and the biases that young children develop at very early ages. But there's hope, because the one thing is whenever a bias is developed, it can be unlearned just like it was learned. When an implicit bias becomes something that we become aware of, now we have an opportunity to be able to address it and to be able to deal with what may have created it and to change the narratives about groups of people who may not be like us. The other thing is when we think about this equity work that has to happen in schools, there's also hope because there are other studies that show us that when parents and teachers and students and the community come together and make a commitment and they advocate, student voices heard, and they advocate and they engage with the school system, they can change the school system and they can change the community simply by making the efforts and pushing for it. And so it's important that we create these environments that are affirming for all students so that all students feel a sense of belonging. The truth is, when you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, every individual has an innate need to belong. Everyone needs to belong, not fit in, but belong. So we're good for fitting in. We all know how to fit in, but then we don't get to show up as our authentic selves. We don't get to be who we were created to be. And when we aren't able to be who we are, then that tells us something about the environment. And it tells us that the environment is not the environment that is best for us. It's not an environment where we feel a sense of belonging. To make those kind of changes require the type of commitment that I see happening in Burlington Township. It's the kind of commitment where that takes time. It takes time for marginalized groups to no longer feel that they are at the margins of society. This is hard work. And yet the township is committed to having conversations like tonight, where people are thinking about and addressing things that might be very uncomfortable, things that might be painful for some people. When I tell that story, it doesn't pain me anymore, but I'm sure as a 7-year-old child, I probably felt the pain and the sting of that teacher alienating me in a classroom where I should have felt like I belonged, where I should have been able to thrive. And so when we think about this work, how do we begin to do this work? That I would say is difficult work and takes years to happen. Well, it starts by experiences like this. It starts by us understanding the experiences of those who have been marginalized by society, understanding the history of race in our country and how that history has perpetuated systemic racism in all industries, not just in the education system, in the medical field. There are health inequities that exist in finance, in science and technology. All across our nation, there are systems that are set up where people who may have been marginalized by society are not treated equitably and are not given the same opportunities and are not given the same hopes and dreams, and the doors of access are not being opened for everybody. some simply because of the color of their skin or by how they worship. And all of this is what helps when we become aware of this. This then helps us to be able to understand how we can move forward to not only understand the struggles of BIPOC, Black and Indigenous people of color, but also to be able to change the system that creates a system where everyone feels like they belong, not just the children, but the adults as well. So how do we do that? And how do we engage with one another? Well, it takes courage. It takes awareness. It takes an open mind. It takes patience. It takes a heart and compassion and a willingness to change the status quo, to be able to first recognize where the inequities exist, to not be afraid to talk about those inequities out loud, and to be what I call leaders for equity. Actually, I stole this quote from the National Equity Project. It says, the role of leaders for equity is to make inequities visible, to disrupt policies and practices that perpetuate inequities, and create and design ways of engaging in communities and educating our young people so that everyone experiences a sense of belonging and thrives. So how do we do that? Well, we need to know what those inequities are. So in a school system, we talk to the students, we talk to the families, we talk to one another, and we find out, where have you felt othered? Where have you felt you haven't been given access? Where have you been discriminated against? You begin to unpack where those inequities lie, and you make them known to the entire community, and you get buy-in from the community to address them. We need to think about how we can completely overhaul our policies. When it talks about disrupting policies and practices, well, how do we do that? Well, we've got to know what's in the policies. Ask questions like, who do these policies harm? Who do they benefit? Are there people who are being harmed? And if so, where in the policies do we need to make some changes? And that involves engaging the community in dialogue about how we can address the inequities that lie within our system. And then we've got to be committed to creating the community that is affirming, that is valuing, that is supportive, that is reinforcing, that's stimulating, and helps everyone to feel like, as leaders for equity do, everyone feels like they belong and that they can thrive. Because like I said earlier, we all have this innate need to belong. And who wants to do that? Who wants to be in an environment where they are not a part of the environment, where they have to hide who they are, or they have to minimize themselves, or they can't show up as their authentic selves? Nobody that I know, nobody that I've ever met. So I'm grateful that we're having this conversation today, that we can bring greater awareness to these issues, that we can humanize people who may have been demonized by others, that we can see each other differently, and that we have the potential to bring people together. Again, Liz, I commend you on your efforts and your leadership in bringing folks together tonight. I commend all of you for being here, to be a part of this conversation. And I look forward to hearing from our panelists and all that they have to share, and hearing their stories. And hopefully by the end of this night, we won't change everybody's hearts, but hopefully we will open the door for change, the change that we all want to see. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Tonya, thank you so much. We really appreciate your words, and we appreciate you sharing your story. It's a perfect segue into us gathering around the virtual table. We interact with people day in and day out, and we see what I like to call the top of the iceberg. We see the tip of the iceberg, but we really don't know what's happening beneath the surface of that iceberg with our neighbors and our friends. So this roundtable discussion that we are going to participate in is going to give us some deeper insight. And I want to ask the panelists two questions. The first question, we're going to dialogue, and it's going to be some give and take, and Tonya and I may jump in to push a little bit. But if you were able to just have your way and just say one thing. What is the one thing you would want people to know about you and the skin that you live in that they may not know? Let's get beneath the iceberg and just unmute yourself and go.
I'll go. I'll go first. I would say I'm grateful for this community that I did grow up in. As you see, it's diverse now, and I honestly feel like it was diverse, my entire time in school. I rubbed shoulders, I hung out, I had friends that were of every cultural background, and it created in me a person that was comfortable in my skin. I didn't feel intimidated as I grew up and, had a career in finance. I was doing investments, and that field was mostly filled with white men. And so I would go into a room and I would be the only woman, I would be the only minority. But my growing up in township caused me to be comfortable and not intimidated. And so the fact that I had some white friends and some, every ethnicity, and I would talk to them and I would hear their stories. And that's what it takes, because I had a curiosity, and two, I wanted to be able to understand why people do the things that they do. And you'd be surprised what you find out about people when you just ask the questions. I mean, and there were things that they didn't know about my culture and things like that. There would be, a sense of being intrigued, but not knowing like where it came from or the things that kind of go on, in a home. Let's say a home like my own. I have 3 boys that are totally different complexions. And so they didn't understand or know that you can have a child that is my complexion, and then I have 2 chocolate boys, and it's just like my one son that was 5 at the time that my youngest was born. I remember him saying, well, when is Tyler going to turn Black? And so it's just like it's a constant teaching moments. I actually wrote a little book about it. I have a series of books, never published, but that I wrote off of these experiences. But it was just showing that we come in all different shades, and so even within one household, we can be different shades. So it just takes the time to educate people and to learn about other people and to know, like Liz said, there is something behind every action or every reaction. There's a story behind it, and it takes time to learn those things, and we're all better off for it.
I would echo what Carla said about the diversity that, like, as I'm a lifelong resident of Burlington Township, graduated in 1990 from Burlington Township High School, and never considered that I lived in a school district where there wasn't diversity. I had friends of all different colors and races, and never considered otherwise. Like Carla said, rubbing shoulders with people of all different backgrounds. But in the end, I did grow up in a white suburban neighborhood, and one of the things that I liked what Liz talked about was that tip of the iceberg, that not knowing the other side, right? I mean, you see me here on camera. I am that white male, right? I'm not in finance, right? But I am that white male, and I wanted to talk about how, towards what some of the things that Tonya was saying about that learned bias, and when you pick that up. I was born and raised in a strong Christian home where everyone was accepted, no matter who you are or what you look like. And my parents, God put a love in their heart to have foster children and adopt, orphans. And so my parents adopted my sister, and my sister is mixed race. She's white, African American, and American Indian. And at a very young age, that made no difference to me. I just knew she was my sister. There was nothing different about her other than the way she looked. And I didn't know that anybody else saw her differently until one night we had a small fire in my home that centered around the fireplace and the chimney. And, my parents got us out of the house when the fire department showed up, and they took us across the street to my neighbors so that the fire department could do what they needed to do. And people from my white suburban neighborhood stood outside my house singing and saying, "Let that house burn," with some other expletives, etc. And I came to find out later on that they were doing that because my sister was Black and she lived in that home. And until that moment, I had no idea that anybody like that lived in my house, or in my neighborhood. I didn't know that anybody could think that way or do those kind of things or say those kind of things. Nor did I have any idea that anybody could judge not only my sister, but my family because my sister lived there. And I'm not here to speak for my sister. Honestly, at some point you should probably have her on because she's very successful. She's a professor out in Colorado, and I'm proud of her for that. But it was in that moment that I realized the type of hatred that was out there. And I never knew that until that moment, because I grew up in a home that accepted everyone, a loving home that accepted other people, and went to a school district of all kinds of different people. And in that moment learned of bias and hatred. And, although I didn't, there was a sign hung in the trailer that the camper that we used to go camping in with my grandparents. It said, "Never judge a man until you've walked a mile in his moccasins." And I've never walked a mile in my sister's moccasins, that's for sure. But that incident was eye-opening to me.
I'll jump in. Dory and Morgan, I wasn't here for the introductions, and I'm sorry that for my tardiness. However, I grew up in Burlington Township, born and raised. I guess one of the questions earlier is what is your background? I'm African American. Probably you can see that, male. And the experience that I had in Burlington Township, again, I tell everyone, I just absolutely loved my growing up experience. And looking back on it, as several have already said, I mean, I had, friends. I had Do Young, Kim, good friend, and Nurki, and Hesham, and so many different people of different ethnicities. And the truth of the matter was, growing up, I didn't even recognize that they were different. We were all part of the same community. Razor Zach, my best friends like ever growing up, and we were just all in it together. Now there were some instances that I do recall where on the bus, and I hope I'm not breaking up. My computer is telling me that my internet is having problems, but there were times on the bus after school, especially the late bus when we were, after with sports and that sort of thing, and they would have to go to all the neighborhoods as opposed to just one neighborhood or stop. And there were times when you would hear, don't go to Browntown first, that sort of thing. Growing up, it was real. Now it was a joke and a laugh, but the truth of the matter was, very often, those of us who lived in Browntown, Lagore Square, we got home later, but it was real. And later on, what I wanted to do as an attorney, I'm an attorney, is try to help, one, identify issues in the system, but do what I can to change those systemic racial biases. And one that I've seen a lot over the last 5 years or so comes out a lot in the law, especially in criminal defense law, is furtive movements. If you move different than the officer is used to you moving, that's furtive. That gives them probable cause to go further into the stop or holding or doing, the next step. And what I was seeing, especially a lot after several of the African Americans were getting shot by police officers unarmed, is I was seeing a lot of African Americans when they're getting pulled over by police or police stop, just a regular car stop, And if they start to sweat, or if they start to shake, or if they start to show any fearful indicia, the police officer all of a sudden had this probable cause now to say that you've done something wrong. When the truth of the matter is, many of us, including me, I got pulled over once. I was, if I don't tell anybody else, I was scared to death, just wondering what's going to happen in this stop. So we need to look, and I know there's a lot of classes going on, and there's a lot of teaching now on sensitivity. And I think that we, not only as I grew up, and I've heard it said, we don't even recognize color. I think we need to grow beyond that and do recognize color, ethnicity, cultures, and not just say, I don't recognize you, but I do recognize you and I celebrate you. And I think that's the next step in evolution in our cultures, in our country. And that's what I want to be a part of, taking that next step of saying, yes, I do see that you're different, and I'm glad about it. And I'm glad you have a different experience than me. And I want to learn more about your culture, and I want to learn more about your history and your whatever. And that's what I think. It's not just saying we're all the same, because in reality, your eyes always, that's the first thing you do. First thing you do is see before you get to know anyone or whatever. And very often you start to judge just on sight. And I just hope that our next step in evolution is to judge well as opposed to judge negatively. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you,
jump in.
Dorian. Go ahead, Bobby Joe.
I might zigzag a little bit, but to jump on that, I believe the way when you say people judge just by looking at you, I think that is taught when you're little. Most of the time, I think it's taught at home. And I feel that that's what needs to change, because I do feel, like Tonya said, it could be unlearned, right? They are taught it, so they learn it. And I believe that they could be educated enough to get out of the racism that they learned. But we talked about it before on the first critical conversation that we had. My husband grew up in Tuckerton. I grew up in Burlington City. I think my husband may have had 2 Black people in his school. Burlington City was just like Township. I grew up, we were 1, but my husband didn't grow up like that. But he's not racist at all. So he didn't learn that. So I feel you're taught it in the house, not at school. I feel it comes from home first. So I'm jumping all over right now, but that's what I want to say. I think it starts at home.
Thank you, Bobby Joe. Go ahead, Jen.
Jump in, because it's what Dorian said actually is kind of a good segue to kind of what I grew up in a community in Jersey City that was we had a little section called Little Manila, and there were all Filipinos, and my family is from the Philippines. My husband's family is from the Philippines. He and I are both first generation here, but we have very strong family ties and cultural ties to the Philippines. Our families we teach our kids about our culture. They eat the food that we ate when we were growing up. So coming to Burlington Township, we kind of felt like there weren't a lot of people when we first moved here that looked a lot like us. And that wasn't to say that it wasn't diverse, but there definitely, I could probably count on one hand how many families there were, how many Asian families that actually looked like us. And I remember my kids growing up, and when they were little, they never really recognized that, which I guess was good in a way. They would describe kids as, the girl with the yellow hair or the boy with the brown hair. It wasn't ever about skin color, which we actually loved. I mean, we loved that they they didn't see that, but then we also missed kind of being recognized for our particular background, and we had to, there were many kids that didn't know what a Filipino was, and there were many kids who didn't know where the Philippines was, and even some adults. And that I think was something that we in our community had to sort of teach our friends and our children's friends about that, and that not all Asians that look like us are from China. I mean, that was kind of the assumption. Oh, well, they must be Chinese, which, again, not to diminish the Chinese culture, but it also kind of diminishes the fact that our families came from a different country and we have different, a different set of beliefs and different cultures. And so I think for us, luckily, we didn't really experience any kind of where we were discriminated against, but definitely there was kind of a lack of recognition of who we are and what our background was.
Thanks, Jen.
If I can chime in next here, I know based off of the way that I look, my name does not match at all. I'm actually 100% Puerto Rican. My parents are straight off the island. I'm also first generation. And so a lot of really, certain things growing up that I had to deal with was like getting yelled at about trying to get a tool and I don't know the word in Spanish, and so I'm trying to like figure out and I don't know what these certain things are, and all this other stuff. But something that I've kind of recognized is I'm Hispanic, and that's mostly by my name or by the fact that I can speak Spanish. But I never had to worry about things like being stopped and being more nervous than I should have been for the fact that I was speeding. I never had to be nervous about going into a convenience store and everything like that. I tell this story very often now with some of the work that I get to participate in, but I had a friend who was actually Filipino, and he would he looked like the person that the clerk should be paying attention to. And so the way we actually worked that out is he would be the distraction because he looked like he was the one stealing something, but I would actually be the one to steal stuff. And so lawyer Dorian, don't tell anybody. But I was the one that was actually stealing stuff because I looked white. I look how I look, and was kind of no one suspected me of that kind of thing, right? So knowing what I know now, what I try very much to do is recognize the fact that because I am a straight white man, I am invited into certain rooms or invited to certain tables that other people aren't invited to. Other people that are people of color or women, I'm invited to certain conversations that other people are invited to. And as I begin to infiltrate, for lack of a better term, those kind of conversations, what I try to do is provoke in those kinds of things. Hey, how come it is just 7 white men sitting around this table? How come we don't have people of color here? How come we don't have women's opinions coming to this table? And so I get to kind of play the double agent, is what I like to say, because I am white on the outside but brown on the inside, and so I get to play that kind of double agent and try to provoke those conversations that other people might not be allowed to, whether intentionally or unintentionally. I want to be able to insert myself into that so that I can then bring other people along with me to get the seat that they so well deserve at the same tables that I'm sitting at.
Thank you, Ruben. Anyone else?
I just want to share real quickly, growing up in New York, I'll be completely honest. I grew up in Jamaica, Queens, where, well, if my husband would kill me if I didn't but acknowledge this part, I'm from Brooklyn. I became a girl in Jamaica, Queens, because I moved there at a certain age, and that's kind of where I blossomed. But growing up, I was surrounded by people that did look just like me. And that was my constant. That was what was familiar. What I've noticed since moving to township, I've kind of gotten like, I look at my kids and who their friends are, and I get a sense of, I don't want to say like a pride, but like, wow, okay, living here, as much as I joked about it before, when I moved down here, I get to see my kids have friends with different, ethnic backgrounds and different, celebrating different cultures. And, I'm happy for them. Like, I didn't have that. And I'm not going to say that I missed not having it, but I'm glad that they have the opportunity in Burlington Township to get that exposure that I didn't get growing up. I was able to explore as I got older and can, maneuver on my own, but that's not what I grew up in. And, I see these kids in Burlington Township, and, I'll be at one of the football games and just kind of amazed at the groups that I see. It's not like all the Black kids here and all the, white kids in this group, and they're all very, integrated with each other. I'm not naive. I know there's probably, different times that, yeah, they probably do separate and go into these groups again. But I don't know, something about Burlington Township is like it fosters a diverse environment, period. Your neighbors are, I don't think any neighbor I've had looked exactly like me since I've been living here. It's always been someone's a little bit different than who, what we look like. So I appreciate that diversity in Burlington Township. And, it's kind of cool. I'm glad my kids are being raised in this space. It's a little bit of a bubble, once they step outside, the experience is definitely going to be a little bit different, but I like that the groundwork is set, that they know that they have the confidence to operate in any room that they go in outside, because they're used to just operating in different spaces. So that's kind of all I wanted to share there.
And Alicia, it's been like that for all of us that went to township. It's been like that. I used to be a
I'm
cheerleader.
impressed, like
Our cheerleading squad has always been diverse. So, it's this is us. This is us. Who else?
I just wanted to
Pradeep?
circle back. I don't mean, I'm sorry, Pradeep, I don't mean to cut you off if you want to go. I just
No,
wanted
you're
to,
fine.
I just wanted to circle back to what some of the things Dorian was saying, and Dorian and I have worked together on opposite sides of the chair. He knows I respect him and the work he does. He and I went to Model Congress years ago, right? So I've known Dorian a long time, and I respect, his work and what he's doing there. But just like Dorian talks about, when he was stopped, right, for a motor vehicle violation, and this, he got nervous and didn't know how that stop would go. I also circle back to what Liz was saying about that tip of the iceberg, right, and how nobody should be judged, right, by what they see with their eyes. Those experiences growing up in my household made me who I am today, and shaped my views on people and how everybody should be accepted. Just like Bobby Joe was saying, that it's learned. It really is. I have another adopted sister from the Philippines. My parents were missionaries in the Philippines for a few years in Mindanao, and so my dad speaks Tagalog, and so that's another thing that's below the surface of the tip of this iceberg, right? And when I first, got on the job as a law enforcement officer, people would automatically assume things about me, right? Because I'm a white guy, I look like a police officer, right? I have a short haircut, right? All the standard cookie cutter things, right? And they also automatically assumed that the things that I was doing and the actions I was taking and the violations that I was writing them for were because they were a minority, and not simply because I was doing my job, right? Or maybe there was a violation, a true violation of the law, traffic or otherwise. And so, in all different aspects, right, in our community, people should, like Dorian said, look beyond the skin and not automatically assume. And I'm not to bring up an inflammatory topic by any means. When the situation in Minnesota occurred, in Minneapolis with George Floyd, I was angry at the officer that was participant. angry about it. And I actually wrote about it on Facebook because I said, I was angry not only at what he did to George Floyd, but also that I knew the shockwave of negative perspective that it would put on law enforcement in general. And it was disappointing because it set years of work backward.
Yeah.
On top of the unfortunate circumstance and outcome that happened to George Floyd himself. And so I hope that we can all continue to work. Not that, you know, we haven't been doing so, and I think that eyes were opened around the country to needing to change the way that people that we see each other, like Dorian said.
Pradeep?
Yeah, if I can. So personally for me, it took some time to get used to, so my appearance is more religious based. So it took me some time to, accept it and say, yeah, this is how my appearance will be. So something I truly appreciate is when people come up and ask questions. And so if you guys ever have questions, I appreciate them. Why do I look like this? Why do I wear my turban and grow out my beard? So I've always appreciated people that do that. And so it did take me a little while to get used to it, but I'm comfortable and I do appreciate the questions.
Awesome.
I have a question if I can.
Go ahead, Carla.
So in what we were speaking about with Officer James Ford, what was your I don't want to, mess it up, but and with Dorian's talking about, and even so when Alicia said, in a sense, it does feel like a bubble, right? I grew up how I grew up, and my kids are growing up here. And while I have to teach them about the possibility as Black boys that will be Black men, while I have to teach them about what's going on and the possibilities of when they get stopped, it's a very hard pill to swallow that I have to teach my kids, don't do anything, just come home to me. And then you have on this other side where there's our township police officers are always present and always pleasant. And like my son, we've been going to basketball games, every game, because my older son plays high school basketball. So my 4-year-old has been at these games, and I can't tell you how many officer cards this little man has, right? Like he's going to get out of jail for a long time. No, but he's and he goes up to them, he gives them pounds, like they all know him, he knows them. And so it's just like a hard balance, because you have to teach them the reality outside of Burlington Township, right? Because everybody may not treat them how township police treat them. So it's just it's a hard balance. And if you guys have any insight on something like that, I'm always all ears to learn something new,
No,
So I brought that up, the first critical conversation that I said as a white mother. I'm sorry about my dogs. When my 2 boys go out the door, give me a hug, here's this, here's that, 5 minutes, bye, be good. As a Black mother, it's probably a half hour before your kids get out the door, because you are, if this happens, if this happens, if this happens, 4 hugs later. I couldn't imagine. So I get it.
Bobby Joe, and I've said this in our other critical conversations. My husband and I, we have three boys, ages 21, almost 20, and our youngest just turned 13. And people tease me. They're like, Liz, you're such a lawnmower mom. I don't even get the helicopter mom status. I'm the lawnmower mom because I'm there. But I'm there because of the fear that's in the back of my mind, that when I sent my boys off to college, it wasn't just, okay, good. Like me, I was tracking on Life 360 where my boys were at all times until they cut me off. But that was my safety net, knowing that, probably nothing I could do about it, but in the back of my mind, what if you get stopped? Don't wear your hood. It the conversations that I've had to have with my boys is it's heartbreaking, and I shouldn't have to, but unfortunately, even in 2022, you still have to have those conversations. We do live in a very safe bubble here in Burlington Township. And when my boys went off to college, I have one at TC&J and one that's in Pennsylvania. You know, those officers don't know them. They don't know that, that's Troy and Liz Scott's son. I don't know what's going to happen or how that reaction is going to be. I mean, my husband and his brother, who's a state trooper, they've been on the receiving end with law enforcement. And it's like, my brother-in-law is saying, I'm an officer. We don't care. You fit the description. So, it's something that as a mother of Black men, you just learn to live with it as being a norm, and it shouldn't be.
And that's why I'm saying that the next evolution, because not only do I want you to, first of all, see me and my difference, but respect and celebrate it. But that goes the same way as is it detective, is it captain, or are you chief yet, James? Ford.
Detective Sergeant.
Detective Sergeant is saying, on the other hand, as a police officer walks up, I shouldn't prejudge him that he's going to do something to me either. Because just like from their perspective, looking at Black people, there's only a very small percentage that actually commit crimes. Well, look back, there's only a very small percentage of officers that actually do anything that's, negative, if you will. Now, none of us like to get a ticket, but we just need to stop speeding. And that's their job, so, but it is a two-way thing where we need to stop looking at each other in a negative connotation just from sight.
Some of that is difficult to do
Maybe that's
because
pie in the sky. Absolutely.
the biases are, implicit. We all have them. So we all have bias. And the implicit bias is the bias we're not even aware we have until it comes to light in some way, meaning someone else has brought it to our attention, or we do some introspection and we really begin to examine some of the early messages that we've received as young children. And those early messages then inform us of what our lens might be and how we might see the world and see different people. Oftentimes we're not even aware that we have these particular biases. And so then, because everybody has them and you get them as early as, you may have them as early as 3 years old, we really have to do the work to uncover them and then to go to work to change them. So to be able to change your view or belief about other groups of people, that's hard work. That belief work is some of the hardest work that we have to do. It's possible because our brains are malleable. They're like muscles. So the more you work it, the more you can develop. So some of that comes from like, how do we drop the barriers and the walls that separate and divide us? So conversations like this help us to get to know one another. But in a township like Burlington, where there's such great diversity, there are opportunities all around to be able to engage people who don't look like you.
Mm-hmm.
If I can ask a question, I'd really love to do that. So one of the things that I think that I really like about what everybody's saying on this panel is the fact that your collective experience has been full of plenty of diversity, which is amazing. I'm a transplant of Burlington, so I've only been living here for a little over a year now, and I've been in the area for the last 4 years. But I'm very I can echo the fact that diversity that we're all talking about is very prevalent in Burlington, right? And what I really love is even like some of you guys are talking about, you were talking about yesterday and a little bit today as well, is that this experience that's in Burlington full of that diversity is not something that's exclusive to 2022, but something that you've all experienced for decades on end, right? And I think that's absolutely incredible, right? I am the father of a young daughter, right? And there's things that, as you guys are all talking about, is here's what our history looks like. Here's what now looks like. And I think a little bit of what Dorian's talking about, what's that next stage? What's that next thing that happens? My question is, how would you, anybody who's a parent, right? How would you want, what are you doing? Because some of you are parents right now. What are you doing, or what would you like to have changed, or what would you like to do to make sure that that diversity that we're all experiencing continues and grows even for this next generation, right? My daughter is 1.5 years old. What do I do as a father to make sure that my daughter does not have certain biases that she shouldn't have?
So think about who you surround your daughter with and who you're around. So she's going to observe the things that are obvious and the things that aren't so obvious. And she's going to begin to create connections and make associations. So if the people that she sees you around is diverse, then she's going to begin to just see diversity as just a way of life and accept that and celebrate that and come to expect that. And she's not going to have those types of biases necessarily. Now, some of the imagery that may come through media that you can't completely control, you can while she's really young, but at some point, if she has a telephone or whatever and can scroll the internet, she may begin to get exposed to other things. But a lot of it has to do with, what are the early messages? Who do you communicate with? Who do you hang out with? Who are your friends? Who's your close circle? Who's not? Who's excluded in these groups of people that you're around on a regular basis? That's some of the beginning of the messages that she will, where she will make connections as a young child.
I love that. Thank you so much.
I would agree with
Like,
that. I would agree with what Tonya was saying. I mean, just in your household and for me, it was my household, the church I grew up in. We were surrounded by diversity, and like Bobby Joe said, I mean, but that's not true for everyone. It's
Right.
just not. And so then training, untraining, if you will, right, Tonya, has to occur for adults. And I certainly don't want to make this a law enforcement centered conversation by any stretch of the imagination, but that's occurring now, right? Because of recent events, right? Implicit bias training is occurring in police departments. The Fraternal Order Police in New Jersey is working with the Attorney General's office and the legislator on additional training to help people, unlearn those things. We'd be foolish to say, right, that those things don't exist, right? Not in everyone, right? No blanket statements, not in everyone, but we'd be foolish to say they don't exist. And so, as a parent as well, Ruben, to answer your question, just trying to, like Tonya said, surround your children with diversity in the home, in your place of worship, in the schools that they go to, and the friends that they hang out with, so that we don't have to unlearn them when they become adults, right?
But even sometimes, like where Alicia said, and my husband growing up with all white people, and Alicia growing up with people of her culture. So when you're younger and sometimes your parents live where they live, you're surrounded by people who are the same. So it's up to the parents to still try to, it doesn't mean you have to hang out with, my husband had to hang out with a young Black kid so he can learn not to be racist. It's just not, sometimes it doesn't happen that way. You just have to teach them.
So one thing I'll say, a lot of what I do like about, again, Burlington Township is we have these rec departments, right? So you have opportunities to get your kids signed up into these rec departments. That's one of the best ways to expose them to all kinds of, others' children that come from different backgrounds, different cultures. So it's not just left on, okay, well, who am I hanging out with? Give them the opportunity to get in these spaces, and then that relationship becomes a little bit more organic. But you as a parent, you have to identify it too. Like, okay, well, I see who my children are making friends with. Let me make, not so much friends, but like, let me get acquainted with the parent. We can set up play dates or whatever. My daughter, she's 8. She's got 2 girlfriends. One's a little Caucasian girl. Another's a little Latinx young lady. These little girls, they set their own plan and told us later. So, but you have to be on board with it. Like these kids are going to do what they not what they want to do, but they're going to create the spaces. You as a parent, you have to welcome it, and you have to go into the spaces too. You have to make yourself comfortable with it. So your daughter, she's 1.5. Listen, she's blowing bubbles right now. She's not really, she's not making play dates. She's not, exchanging phone numbers, because this is legitimately what my daughter did. Her and her friends exchanged the mom's numbers. And we just kind of like, oh, okay, I guess we're all getting together. And our first exposure to each other, we all went together. It was the 3 moms and the 3 girls. Just, kind of just see where your daughter's going. She's going to have little daycare friends. They're not going to look like her. Engage with the parent. That's kind of where you kind of got to take the lead. She's leading here. Do your part and go into that space. That's the advice I would give. Follow their lead.
I love that, Alicia. Thanks. That was good.
Sure.
And I think that's so true. I mean, not to pick on Bobby Joe. Bobby Joe and I are friends, but had we met 35 years ago, 30 years ago, my parents probably wouldn't let me hang out with you, because you were just very different from the people I grew up with. And that's one of the things that I loved about coming here to Township is, again, through the rec programs and through the schools and activities and sports that my kids were involved in, we were able to meet all of the parents. We are still friends with all the parents who are all very different from us, and yet we're, deep down, we're kind of the same. We have the same love for our children. We have the same love for our communities. So it doesn't matter whether my skin color is different from anybody else's. I mean, we all we have all different backgrounds, and we're all there. We come together for the same purpose. And I think that's one of the great things about our community and the activities that are available to us and to our children. So, it is about who you surround yourself with and who you allow your children to surround themselves with, and they'll kind of just grow into their own,
Yeah.
And that's what I love about being in this community.
The truth
Jen,
is,
listening to you, Ty, real quick, just listening to you, a picture just popped in my head, and I'm sure you may remember this picture of the baseball moms that we took one summer, and it was a rainbow of
Yeah.
baseball moms over at Skimmer Field, and it's just who we are. Again, taking off on the title. This is us in Burlington Township.
We were all different, and yet deep down kind of all the same too.
Yep.
and I love that you said we're kind of all the same, because actually scientists have conducted DNA studies, and the truth is we actually are the same. So when we think about race is a social construct, really to create a hierarchy based on skin pigmentation. And once upon a time, race didn't exist, but once it became a distinction, if you will, it's what kind of created the separation and created the hierarchy that we have seen in our society. And unfortunately, it's really a myth. because we are pretty much, when we look at our DNA, we're like 99.9% the same. And it's amazing. We look at one another and we come with all different colors and hues, but underneath the surface, we are not that different from one another. But we may have different cultural experiences that we bring to the table, and I think that should be honored and celebrated and valued. And I do want you to see me when I walk in the room. I want you to see that I'm a Black woman. I know I am. There's no shame in that, And so, but I also want you to see me and to see me, inside, not just the external me, but to see all of me. And that we really aren't very different from one another, but that it takes us really being intentional and getting to know one
Absolutely.
another.
Absolutely.
I'm smiling at that when you said that, because I'm actually a forensic scientist with the state police, and my background is in DNA. And you're absolutely right. Not more than 99% of our DNA is exactly the same. And it's that less than 1% that makes us all different. And it's enough. It's enough to make us all unique,
Mm-hmm.
So I'm glad you brought science into that. I'm very happy.
My pleasure.
I knew you would enjoy that, Jen.
I did see you smiling.
So I had another question. Well, actually, I had two more questions, but it's almost 8:00, and I know many of you have to either get dinner or get kids ready for tomorrow. But I do want to close us out with one final question, and everybody doesn't have to answer it, but whoever wants to. My question is, what do you hope for the future when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion in Burlington and beyond?
I hope it stays the same but gets better. No, I just hope that the environment continues to get nurtured as like what you're doing now. I just hope that there's even more awareness. I would love to know at, I guess, another time, of course, of the experiences of not just African American children, but like Filipino children, or, that are even more of a minority than African Americans in the numbers that we have here in the community, and that is nurtured even more as well. So that's my hope.
Yeah, I'm also really looking forward to it. I was on the school board last year, and I know, Mrs. Scott, how much you've done and how much the board appreciated what you were doing. So I'm really looking forward to it, and I hope we keep on growing.
I'm kind of going to echo what Prabdeep just said. Liz, I hope you continue getting the support from the district that you've been getting, because these are tough conversations. They've been tough conversations, and I'm glad you're getting the support not only from the school district but from the community. You assembled a crew right here that just because you asked and we're all present, not a lot of people could pull together what you've been successfully pulling off. So I just hope for Burlington Township, they don't think that, okay, hope she's done now. Let's move on. I do hope the conversations continue to grow. They become less uncomfortable, and more people engage in what you're trying to do here.
We're
As
going to keep
Alicia's-
moving on.
Yeah, as Alicia said, keep that going. As I mentioned earlier, I just hope that the evolution continues. And these conversations, these critical conversations, are a part of that evolution. I believe you coined that very early on. This is not a sprint, but a marathon. It's a long distance race that we have to continue. And as Alicia said, I'm on several boards, and one board that I'm on, I won't say it because we're a little disappointed with them now, because there's nothing hot in the news, we used to have a board of 12, 15 to 20 people showing up. We just had a meeting the other day. I think it was 3 or 4 of us that came. We have to keep the conversation has to continue. We can't just wait for one big headline or another to then show up and voice our, concerns or needs for change. We have to keep this thing going. Good times, bad times, quiet times, heated times. It's that important, I believe.
I think it would be a good idea if we could get some of the kids on here and do this one time to see what they think.
We actually did a session last year with the kids. And Dorian actually did another session with them about know your rights and, police interactions. That was powerful. We will definitely be doing something else with our kids, without a doubt, because again, that's where it starts. That's where it continues. We have to keep the conversation going.
Just to, like I said, again, piggybacking off of what Dorian said, that evolution, that continuance of change right here in the local community and outside. These conversations are great. And Liz, I think this is a great idea. What you're doing here is my first experience with it, right? And look at the diversity we have just in the squares on the screen, right? But conversations are just that. They're conversations. They're starters, right? And so it's my hope, which is your question, right, that the conversations carry into action, and that to paraphrase Dr. Martin Luther King, right, that these conversations carry into action so that people aren't judged by the color of their skin, but the content of their character. And that these conversations continue as action grows, right? And there's more action than there is conversation.
Absolutely. So again, I want to thank each and every one of you for joining us on this journey. I want to thank our attendees. At one point, we were up to about 41 people. That's huge. That speaks volumes that we're doing the right thing. So I applaud all of our attendees. I applaud all of our panelists. I applaud Tonya. This is work that I am truly dedicated to doing, and we will continue to do it. What you did tonight was not easy. None of you pretty much knew each other. You're connected, and I'm probably the one piece that does connect all of you. But it was a talk amongst strangers that was so powerful. And we only got to one question, and I had others, but that's okay, because we're going to continue the conversation. But in true teacher form, I'm giving you all homework, attendees and panelists. And your homework is this. I want you to take the time to have a difficult conversation with someone who does not look like you. I want you to talk with them about their experiences. I want you to talk with them about their why. I want you to talk with them about their how. I want you to talk with them about things that have happened to them. And I want you to share your stories. We are all in this together. Our DNA, the scientists have told us, we are almost all the same, except for that one little piece that makes us different. But it's important that we just sit down and have the conversation. And I look forward to us having a time when we're actually going to go into the pack and have a serious roundtable discussion in person, because it is something that we have to do. I want to thank everyone again. And I want to just tell you how much I appreciate your willingness to continue this conversation. I love that show, This Is Us. And looking at the screen now, this is us. This is the Burlington Township edition. And that show may be ending, but our story continues. So I want to wish everyone well. Have an amazing evening. Today's Tuesday, so have a terrific Tuesday. And tomorrow have a wonderful Wednesday and the rest of the week. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful evening, and thank you again. We appreciate you. Keep the Falcon flying high, because that's what we do.
Liz,
Thank
we
you.
Thank
appreciate
you.
you.
Good night,
Thank you.
everybody.
Liz.
Bye, guys.
Nice meeting you all.